This says a lot about the Avalanche, as there is a report from a reliable source surrounding the conversation about head coach Jared Bednar trying to play the field with multiple options for the 3C position as he tries to get his bottom six lines dialed in and ready to go for the start of the NHL season. And we're going to not just go over this report today on Avalanche Digest, but the report and the conversation around it segues perfectly into the outcome of tonight's preseason game between the Avalanche and the Vegas Golden Knights, which we are also going to break down. And at the end, we'll circle back to the initial conversation from the news report that we talk about and talk about just how everything coincides and comes together with this specific conversation. Welcome into Avalanche Digest, everybody. As you know, my name is Mark Robinson. Happy to be here breaking down all things Colorado Avalanche with all of you lovely listeners. Channel is thriving right now, ladies and gentlemen. Doing good on the subscriber count, doing good on the view count, but we want to keep things rolling. We want to keep things growing, and that is where all of you lovely listeners and beautiful viewers come in. We need you guys to make sure that you're subscribed to the channel here on YouTube. If you're a part of that 70%, watching our videos every single day, but not subscribed, let's get that changed right now. Join the Avs Digest family. Join the Avs Digest community. Make that amazing decision and come join us here at Avalanche Digest. Not going to tell you anymore. You guys know the drill. Get on the subscription list. We need you to do that ASAP. But without further ado, let's dive into this report and this conversation. So during preseason, head coach Jared Bednar has been testing some things out with his bottom six, you might say, specifically with the center position, because he's got some star-studded talent on the bottom six, and he's got some really efficient hockey players who bring a lot of different aspects to the table. And he's trying to figure out what the best and most lethal line is. And the best way to do that is preseason. And so Jared Bednar put Ross Colton at center on the third line, or not just even on the third line, just tried him out at center during preseason to try to play around with what he could potentially do, how he could potentially thrive in that position throughout the season, and how he can, jumble the lines up and mix with the lineup a little bit throughout the year. And so that's essentially what we're going to be kicking things off with and breaking down here. So, quote from Jared Bednar, he's going to get a couple of games and they're still coming up. I want him to be familiar with playing center. With just where we're at and our numbers, our roster, Bednar prefers Ross Colton to be on the wing, but having him get reps at center is not going to hurt him. It's going to help Jared Bednar keep his options open for playing around with the lines. So we're going into the season with multiple options. So Bednar said that after practice a few days ago, it's a lot more work playing center, playing goal line to goal line, but he was pretty comfortable with him there in years past in the way that he functioned. Bednar just wants to make sure that he's, working on some of those situations in practice and in games coming up here. So he's ready to go if that's what we choose to do. I like this move a lot from Jared Bednar, playing around with that bottom six, seeing who works where, seeing what the most ideal line combination and the most ideal lineup is for the Avs. And I think that as far as, making the most out of a hockey preseason, this is the best way to do so. And Jared Bednar is doing a great job trying to figure out how these players are going to mesh into the lineup in different ways. So at the center position, Ross Colton didn't have the best game. He was scoreless. He was a -1. He had 0 shots on goal, all in his 1848 minutes of ice time. But he did excel in the dot with a 62.5% on faceoff wins. While his play was off, the experience was useful for him, and it was useful for Coach Bednar as well to figure out what kind of combinations he wants to try to drum up and how he wants to put these lines out against all sorts of different opponents that the Avs are going to kick off this season with to try to get a hot start on the season. And then even more so, depending on what happens throughout the season with, any potential injuries, any potential trades, any potential guys coming in from other organizations from trades and stuff like that. He wants to, have it in the back of his mind what kind of efficiency a player like Ross Colton can have playing in the middle on offense. And so because it was preseason, despite the obviously, tough numbers from Ross Colton, it was an efficient move for Bednar to play him at that position. And then Ross Colton spoke on this as well, talked about, kind of his perception of the experience. The quote is a little bit cut off on the top there, but he's essentially saying he hadn't played any center at all last year. He didn't play it once in camp. And then, Bednar kind of just threw him into the fire and put him at that position and said it took him a little bit of adjustment. He said he felt fine, definitely a little bit weird for the first 2 periods, but then in that last period, he felt like he was a little bit better and settled in. I mean, that's just human nature. That's how everything goes. Once you, practice riding a bike for a while, after a little bit, you get better. For me, once you practice, broadcasting sports and talking about sports and stuff like that, the more you do it, the more settled in you get, the better you get at it. So the fact that Colton hadn't played any center all of last season, he also dealt with some injury last year, hadn't played it in the offseason, hadn't played it during camp, and then he kind of just gets thrown into the fire. It shows a light at the end of the tunnel for Jared Bednar, considering that he might want to try to utilize Ross Colton at this position. And then, after tonight's preseason game, which we'll dive into a little bit later on in this video, Ross Colton, talked a little bit, not just on playing center, but just on the whole topic of preseason. As much as preseason games can kind of stink, which I think a lot of people in the NHL feel that way, Colton felt like it was a really good way to get out there and get, his game legs underneath him and just get dialed in for the season. And I think that that's exactly what Jared Bednar was trying to do in getting him some center experience. You don't want to put Ross Colton out on the ice and have him play 18, almost 19 minutes playing center and have him be a -1 and not get a single shot on goal during a regular season game. But during the preseason, when nothing counts, nothing matters, and you're just trying to get these guys locked in and dialed and ready to go for the season, no better way, no better time to do that with Ross Colton than right now. And I love the fact that Jared Bednar's kind of playing around with it a little bit. Let's look at the bottom 6 and kind of who's supposed to be where. So looking at that looking at that third line, you got Roscoe on the left, Jack Drury in the middle, and then the newly signed Victor Olofsson on the right. I personally like the way this is laid out right here. I think Jack Drury does a remarkable job playing center, and I think that Ross Colton does really well playing on the wall. He's an efficient goal scorer. He's a puck-heavy moving offensive left winger, and I think keeping him there for the majority of the season is the most efficient play for Jared Bednar and the Avs. But at the same time, I don't hate the idea of throwing Jack Drury on the left wing and putting Ross Colton at center and seeing how those two can mesh playing different positions. And then also, making the argument that Ross Colton might get some reps playing center with, some guys from the top 6 on his right and his left. And that is something else to consider and something else to note when thinking about what Jared Bednar is trying to do in the preseason, how he's trying to get all these guys well-oiled and ready to go for the regular season. Okay, so I kind of talked about how this conversation about what Jared Bednar's doing, the method behind the madness with who he's playing at what position in the preseason, how he's messing with these positions, how it segues really well into the preseason game that the Avs had tonight against the Vegas Golden Knights. And it segues perfectly because the Avs had a dominant win over the Vegas Golden Knights in tonight's preseason game at home in Ball Arena in downtown Denver, Colorado. They remain undefeated in the NHL preseason, which is obviously electric for the Avs. You can obviously say and make the argument that it doesn't matter, who cares, nobody's giving effort, nobody cares, it's the preseason, but it has to give you a little bit of a positive feel and a smile on your face, considering how these guys have been able to perform in the preseason and how much depth scoring they're showing across the guys on the Avs roster who have guaranteed spots playing for Colorado versus some of the guys that are on the Eagles and trying to earn their spot in the prospect pool. So this conversation segues perfectly into tonight and the dominant win because of the scoring and the depth that was shown by Colorado. So let's look at that first goal there in the first period at the 10:43 mark. Jack Drury assisted by Ross Colton and the defenseman Sam Malinsky, but those two first goal and primary assist names, that's that third line right there that we were just talking about. Ross Colton on the left wing, Jack Drury in the middle. He gets a beautiful feed from Ross Colton after a really good play from Sam Malinsky early in the first period. And there's that depth. There's that bottom 6 line that we're going to see in the regular season going to work and getting it done. And then in the second period, the Vegas Golden Knights off to a quick start, 56 seconds in, they get a equalizer and then they take a go-ahead goal with, at the 11:55 minute mark, and they lead the game away heading into the third period. But the Avs once again come out in the third period, guns a-blazing. They show their dominance and they show their depth. Jason Poland gets a preseason tuck assisted by Daniil Gushkin, who's a prospect we've been keeping our eye on, as well as Keaton Middleton, a big, heavy hitting player for the Avs who can put a lot of efficient hockey on the table for the Avs. And then look at that equalizer at the 5:54-minute mark. It's the same gosh darn two guys. Roscoe gets a tuck assisted by Jack Drury. They're just trading off at this point, letting themselves each get a tuck and an assist. Absolutely electric stuff. And I just think that the fact that Jared Bednar was trying to play around with some of these guys on the bottom six and the third line and see what they can do at different positions and see what their capabilities are in the preseason heading into the regular season. I think that this performance and the fact that Jack Drury scored a goal off a primary assist from Ross Colton, and then the exact same thing happened the other way around, a Ross Colton goal from a Jack Drury assist. I think that just goes to show that the Avs have a pretty darn deep offensive roster heading into the regular NHL season. And then, of course, got to shout out my Manuel Kiviranta getting the empty net goal with literally 1 second left in the game. So a great win, and the Avs remaining perfect in preseason has got me fired up. So electric stuff as we're getting closer and closer to the NHL season. I mean, it's obviously late right now as we're getting this video going. Right now, it's 7 days away from the start of the season. One more sleep, and we're less than a week away from Avs hockey being back. I cannot wait. I'm fired up. I'm dialed in. And, I keep hearing a lot of people in the media talking about how this Avs team is awake and ready to rumble this season. And I think we're in for some electric hockey from the Colorado Avalanche with the season coming up and just around the corner here. So thank you guys so much for tuning into Avs Digest as usual. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're checking us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Until we see you next time, cheers. Have a great rest of your night or day, everybody.